Hello, History Seminar, and welcome back. Episode 3. This is Climbing the Pacific Ladder on the events of 1943 into early 1944 in the Pacific. So this is Roman numeral 4 in your notes, and I guess we'll just get to it, huh? Hope everybody's doing okay. Living the dream. I'm going to start by talking about American movements in the Northern Pacific. In May, June, July, August 1943, the United States takes back the Aleutian Islands, which were two of them, Attu and Kiska Island, captured by the Japanese in 1942. So, the Japanese had originally landed as a distraction during the Midway campaign and taken the two islands in June of 1942. And the Americans took almost a year for us to get it together and get an invasion force together to go get them back. But eventually we do. We land at Attu first on May 11th, 1943. They land at the island of Attu. It's first attempt in the north of carrying out some kind of invasion. And it's pretty much a disaster as far as logistics go and unloading things, the same kind of mix-ups that the Navy and Army experience and the Marines experience when trying to work together in other places. But they managed to land on the island okay, and they fight for the whole month, fighting back against the Japanese. The weather was the biggest enemy. The ground was boggy, swampy, it rained all the time, snowed, wind gusts, and just a bad place to fight a battle. Anyway, it all comes to a head on May 29th. On May 29th, the Japanese commander decided he got the word that they weren't going to be rescued and there weren't going to be any reinforcements. And so he decided that the answer was a suicide charge or a banzai charge. And so on May 29th, 1943, that's exactly what happened. And the attack made it about halfway into the American lines, and that was it. They were mowed down by the Americans. And that pretty much wrapped up the fighting, although they'd occasionally still find a Japanese soldier now and then on Attu. Kiska Island went differently. When they got to Kiska Island, the Americans invaded the other island on August 15th, and the only thing left were abandoned Japanese equipment and supplies. The Japanese had evacuated the soldiers out of Kiska Island and figured they couldn't support them there based on the weather and no air support. Anyway, the next big event, the other big event that happens in 43 that you should know about is that based on breaking Japanese codes, they were able to discover exactly where Admiral Yamamoto was. He was out flying from island group to island group, visiting bases and checking on the morale of the troops. The Americans broke the code and discovered that he'd be flying over a specific island at a specific time on a specific day. And so they sent 2 or 3 squadrons of fighter planes over the island, hoping to intercept Yamamoto's plane, and they did. There were 2 twin-engine Betty bombers, and they called them Mark 1 bombers. The Japanese pilots called them Mark 1 lighters. That's how easily they went up in flames. And the plane was shot down. There's a slide in the slide set that's the wreckage of Yamamoto's plane. You can go and visit it on the island if you're out there. Anyway, he's shot down and killed. So with Yamamoto gone, the Japanese have lost their best strategist, their best planner. You could consider him to be the Japanese version of Rommel. So he's out of the picture by 43. The Japanese don't really have a plan from that point on, except try to hold on to what they have until the end of the war. And we know how that goes, right? So the strategy now was something called island hopping, where they would take, if there was a group of 5 or 6 islands, they would take the one island that had the most airfields on it, improve that island, and maintain that island, and then isolate all the Japanese on the other islands instead of having to capture every single one. So one of the first groups of islands they decided to take was in the Gilbert Islands group. It's got about a dozen islands in the Gilbert Islands. There were 2 islands that were deemed suitable because the number of airfields and the infrastructure already there. One was Macon and one was Tarawa. They gave the Macon mission to the Army, and the Tarawa mission to the Marine Corps. Now, these islands are both invaded. The same fleet is split in half and sent to the two islands at the same time. And there's a whole extra fleet that's just aircraft carriers and air cover. I think it's like 6 aircraft carriers or something. Insane. They lose one of them to a submarine attack, but other than that, the invasions go down in, let's see, November 1943. Yeah. So Makin Island, they figured it would take 2 or 3 days. It ends up taking like a week and a half for the army. The Japanese are clearly not surrendering, and they're hiding up in trees as snipers. I mean, you're not going to get out of the tree. You're never going to leave the tree. You're going to pick off a few Americans, and they're going to kill you, and they seem to be okay with that. So, and then the Tarawa invasion takes place a few days later, and the Tarawa invasion, which is supposed to take I don't know, 4 or 5 days, ends up taking like a week and a half, 2 weeks, with just hideous casualties for the Marines because they misjudged the depth of the water. And so the landing boats couldn't make it. They ran into the coral reefs when they were still like 1,000 yards from the beach. And so the Marines all had to jump out of the boats and wade to shore up to their necks in water. And the Japanese were firing the whole time. The first couple of waves, they used amphibious landing craft called Amtraks, which are like tanks. But about half of those got knocked out by the Japanese on their way in. So Tarawa, there's a nice movie. I'll put a link to it on YouTube. The Army put out a movie on Tarawa called Bloody Tarawa or something. The military, not the Army, the Defense Department put it out, and it actually won an Oscar, if I remember correctly. It's in color, and it's all actual combat footage of the invasion. It's like 45 minutes long. Anyway, so we learned from those landings what to do and what not to do, and island hopping will continue after that. You got 2 things going on in the Pacific. You've got the Army under General MacArthur on the western part of the Pacific, leapfrogging their way north toward the Philippines, and then in the eastern half of the Pacific, you've got the Navy and the Marines under Admiral King, Admiral Nimitz, Admiral Halsey, marching island chain to island chain. So there's kind of 2 parallel courses coming toward Japan from at the same time. One of them is an Army show, and one of them is a Navy show. At the same time, also in the Pacific, the counter-invasion of New Guinea occurs. The Japanese landed all over the north side of New Guinea, but New Guinea's got the Owen Stanley mountain range running right down the middle of it, and it is a high range of mountains with thick jungle. It makes it almost impossible if you land on the north side to get to the south side. So it's almost like 2 different islands. The Japanese land soon after Pearl Harbor and everything and take the northern side of the island, and from there they can launch attacks to bomb Australia. So the goal is get rid of these bases and take over these airfields. It takes the Americans months and months and months to make this happen. The fighting over what was called the Kokoda Trail was done by the 32nd Infantry Division, which are Michigan boys and Wisconsin boys. And they're called the Red Arrow Division. So if you're ever on the west side of the state and you see that you're on the Red Arrow Highway, that's named after them. Anyway, the fighting, the Allied landings take place on the southern end of the island. They never quite lose control of it, and then they reinforce it. And so there's a fight from the Allies on the southern side of the island, the Japanese on the northern side of the island, back and forth over this mountain range. The Americans finally land on the northern side in January 42. There's a lot of fighting up until January 44, when the Allies hold the most of New Guinea. But I got to tell you, even at the end of the war, there are still random Japanese soldiers walking out of the jungle in 1945 in New Guinea saying, "What happened?" As you know. Burma, in Southeast Asia, the British and the Chinese, supported by the United States, doing all the fighting there. They built something called the Burma Road, which is the first actual road built through the area, built by U.S. engineers, a lot of them African-American engineer units. And so they can supply the Chinese, and they can build air bases for American fighter and bomber squadrons in Western China to bomb Eastern China and Japan. That goes on. The Allies are on the losing side from 1941 to 43. And the Allies are gaining ground back and completing the road and flying the missions in 1944 and 45 until the war ends. But when the World War II ends, there's still, I don't know how many 100,000 Japanese troops trapped in China who are basically told, hey, the war just ended, you should go home. And it takes months for them to all get home. But that's for a later story. All right, so anyway, I just covered that one slide. And about a 10-minute video. Hope you had as much fun as I did. It's a beautiful day today. Of course, you'll be seeing this tomorrow or on Monday. Hope everybody has a good Passover and a good Easter, or at least a good Sunday. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.